The mansion of Eduardo Sanchez stood like a fortress of glass and steel on the edge of the city. From the outside, it reflected wealth, order, and perfection. Inside, however, there was a very different atmosphere, an invisible storm of arrogance, loneliness, and cruelty. The staff who walked its marble floors knew the truth well. Every chandelier and polished stair was a reminder of a man who valued money above dignity, and a little girl who had learned to wield her father's pride as a weapon. Eduardo was a man whose reputation preceded him. In the corporate world he was praised for his sharpness, his cold calculations, and his ability to crush competitors without blinking. He had built an empire that few could rival. But at home he had built something else, a cage for his only daughter, Clara. Since the death of her mother years earlier, Clara had grown into a child feared by every employee. Nannies came and went like passing seasons, none lasting more than a few days. Her tantrums were legendary, screaming fits that echoed through the halls, plates thrown across the room, insults hurled with frightening precision for someone so young. And yet Eduardo never lifted a finger to stop her. To him, Clara was a reflection of himself, wild, untouchable, and above reproach. "She is my blood," he would say, crossing his arms with a proud smirk whenever the staff dared to complain. "If you cannot endure her, you are not worthy to work here." Those words had left a trail of resignations until one day, when the mansion's gates opened for a new arrival, Mariana. Mariana was not the type to seek trouble. She came from a modest neighborhood, raised in a family where respect was the air one breathed. Life had never handed her luxuries, but it had given her resilience. When she heard of the nanny position, she accepted it without hesitation. She needed the income desperately, her father was ill, and her younger brother's education required steady support. Whatever the challenges, she told herself, she would endure them. What Mariana did not know was that the true challenge was not caring for Clara's daily needs, but surviving Eduardo's twisted sense of pride. Her first morning in the mansion seemed promising at first. She woke early, dressed neatly, and prepared herself mentally for whatever difficulties might come. In the dining hall, sunlight poured through enormous windows, lighting the long table where breakfast had been laid out like a feast. Clara sat at the far end, her tiny hands folded with an expression that looked far too smug for her age. Mariana approached with a gentle smile and tried to set a plate before her. Before she could even place it down, Clara's eyes narrowed, and with a sharp flick of her wrist, the plate crashed to the floor. Food scattered across the marble. "Don't tell me what to do, maid," Clara spat with a triumphant grin. Mariana froze, stunned, but forced herself to take a slow breath. She knelt to gather the broken pieces quietly. That was when she felt Eduardo's presence behind her. His voice was calm, cold, and heavy with disdain. "You see, Mariana, it is not easy to deal with someone of my blood. If you cannot handle it, better say it now." She glanced up at him briefly, but his eyes held no sympathy, only a cruel satisfaction. Clara laughed, the sound sharp and mocking, as if she had already won a battle Mariana did not know she was fighting. From that morning onward, life inside the mansion became a test of endurance. Clara's cruelty had no limits. She yanked Mariana's hair hard enough to make her cry out. She hid important items, Mariana's notepad, cleaning tools, even her shoes, just to watch her scramble. She hurled insults she must have overheard from her father, each one slicing deeper than the last. The other employees whispered among themselves, but none dared to help. They knew Eduardo's rules. Clara's word was law, and contradicting her was dangerous. Each time Mariana hoped Eduardo would intervene, she found him watching with arms crossed, eyes gleaming with amusement. "A weak woman will never resist here," he told her once, after Clara had torn apart a book Mariana had tried to read aloud. "If this frightens you, you should leave." The contempt in his voice burned Mariana's pride, but she bit her tongue. She needed this job. Yet, as the days wore on, the humiliation mounted like bricks on her chest. One afternoon, Clara's cruelty reached new heights. While the staff gathered in the corridor, Clara shoved a glass of water directly into Mariana's face and laughed loudly as it dripped down her blouse. "Look at her. She's pathetic," she shouted. The servants looked away, their silence cutting deeper than the child's laughter. That night, in her small room tucked away at the far end of the mansion, Mariana sat on her bed with her head in her hands. Tears stained her palms as she whispered to herself, "Maybe I should leave just like the others." But even as she said it, something inside her rebelled. She thought of her father, who always told her, respect is not optional. It defines who you are. She thought of her brother, whose future depended on her strength. And then she thought of Clara, who was being raised to believe that cruelty was power. The thought ignited a flame within her. "This is not just about me," Mariana whispered to the empty room. "This is about her future. Someone has to show her that respect matters, even if her father will not." From that night onward, Mariana's resolve began to take shape. She did not know how she would confront Eduardo's arrogance, but she knew she could not remain silent forever. The following days tested her even more. Eduardo invited powerful business partners to his home for a lavish dinner, commanding Mariana to serve without speaking. Clara, emboldened by the presence of guests, set out to humiliate her at every turn. She spilled wine deliberately onto the carpet, then pointed at Mariana and said, "She did it." She tossed silverware to the floor and accused her of clumsiness. Eduardo laughed with his guests, using the moment to belittle her further. "Not even capable of caring for a child," he sneered. "But that is how these people are. They think money comes easily." His words, spoken in front of so many strangers, cut deeper than any insult Clara had ever delivered. Mariana clenched her fists at her sides, holding back the tears that burned her eyes. Around her, the guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared speak. It seemed as though she stood completely alone. But in the silence that followed, when her humiliation seemed unbearable, a chair scraped against the marble floor. An older man with sharp eyes rose slowly from the table. His voice carried a weight that silenced the entire hall. "Eduardo," he said firmly, "enough. That girl is not to blame. It is your pride that is destroying everything." The air in the dining hall froze. Eduardo's smirk faltered. Clara blinked in confusion. Mariana's breath caught in her throat. For the first time, someone had dared to stand against Eduardo Sanchez in his own house. And in that moment she sensed, without yet knowing how, that the course of her life was about to change. The silence after Don Ernesto's words stretched like a shadow across the dining hall. Every guest at the table seemed frozen, their forks hovering above plates, their eyes darting nervously between Eduardo and the older man who had dared to confront him. Clara, who was used to seeing her father treated like a king, blinked rapidly, uncertain whether to smirk or hide. Eduardo rose slowly, his tall frame commanding attention. His face was pale, but his eyes glittered with anger. He fixed his gaze on Ernesto, then shifted it to Mariana, who still stood in the corner, cheeks flushed with humiliation. He stepped closer to her, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low but cutting, meant to slice through her dignity like a blade. "No matter what anyone here thinks," he said, his words echoing in the hall, "she is here because I allow it. And if she doesn't like the way I treat her, she can leave through the same door she entered. Nobody tells me how to raise my daughter or how to run my house." The declaration rolled across the room like thunder. Clara's lips curled into a satisfied smile, as if her father's cruelty were her personal victory. The guests, however, shifted uncomfortably. They looked down at their plates, afraid to meet one another's eyes. Mariana stood rigid, her hands trembling at her sides. A lump formed in her throat, and for a moment she thought she might collapse under the weight of so much scorn. But instead, she inhaled slowly and lifted her chin. Her eyes burned, but not with tears, with determination. Don Ernesto was not finished. He stepped forward, his cane clicking lightly against the polished floor. "Eduardo," he said, voice steady and unwavering, "you are confusing discipline with abuse. This girl," he gestured to Clara, "is not growing into strength. She is growing into arrogance because you use her as a weapon against those around you. And that woman," now he pointed to Mariana, "is not your servant. She is a human being who deserves respect." Gasps rippled through the room. No one had ever spoken to Eduardo this way, not in his home, not in front of his guests. Eduardo's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "Respect," he mocked. "Let us not pretend dignity exists in this room. Everyone here depends on me. They crawl for salaries, they bow to my wealth, and they dare lecture me about respect." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Some lowered their heads. Others clenched their fists beneath the tablecloth. For years, they had tolerated Eduardo's arrogance for the sake of business. But now, the weight of his cruelty was becoming too heavy. Mariana's voice trembled as she finally spoke, though her words were firm. "Power is not proven by humiliating others, Mr. Eduardo. It is shown through respect. Today you trample me because you believe I am insignificant. But your daughter is watching. She is learning that this is how one should treat people. And when she grows up, neither money nor luxuries will fill the emptiness that pride leaves behind." Her words hung in the air like sparks, igniting something in the hearts of the silent guests. Clara's smirk faded. For the first time, her grip on superiority wavered. She glanced down at her small hands, uncertain. Eduardo's face darkened with fury. He leaned close to Mariana, his voice dripping with venom. You have just sealed your fate. Tomorrow you are fired. Out of my house without a penny. And if you dare take even one of my possessions, you will face me in court. No one questions my authority. The dismissal cut through Mariana like a knife, but she did not flinch. She held her ground, though her legs trembled beneath her dress. Around the table, the guests shifted again, caught between discomfort and fear. The humiliation was almost unbearable, but then something shifted. Don Ernesto's voice rose once more, calm yet commanding. Eduardo, he said, your authority is already crumbling. He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick envelope and laid it on the table. The sound was louder than it should have been, echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. Inside this, Ernesto continued, are documents proving your exploitation of your workers, your evasion of taxes, and your manipulation of contracts. You thought we would remain silent forever. But tonight is the night someone finally confronts you. A murmur spread through the room. The guests leaned forward, whispering among themselves. Faces once frozen in silence now lit up with recognition, relief, even defiance. Several began nodding, as though Ernesto's words had unlocked a courage they had buried deep. One woman at the far end of the table stood up. Her voice, though soft, carried a clarity that silenced the whispers. I have watched you treat your daughter like a trophy and everyone else like garbage. For years I stayed quiet. But not anymore. It is not Mariana who is destroying this family, it is you, Eduardo. The room erupted in murmurs. Eduardo's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight. For the first time his confidence faltered. He looked around the room expecting loyalty, but all he saw were eyes filled with disgust, disappointment, and quiet rebellion. Mariana's heart pounded in her chest. She had never expected anyone to defend her, let alone stand up against Eduardo. Tears gathered in her eyes, but this time, they were not from humiliation, they were from the recognition that truth was finally breaking through the cracks of pride. Clara, sitting quietly beside her father, stared at him with wide, uncertain eyes. For the first time in her young life she did not see a hero. She saw a man trembling under the weight of his own lies. The balance of power in the room had shifted. And Eduardo knew it. The chandelier above the dining table seemed to flicker, though the light had not changed. The atmosphere itself had shifted. What once felt like Eduardo's unshakable domain now trembled with tension. His guests no longer looked at him with admiration or fear. They looked at him as if he were a man caught naked in his lies. Eduardo's jaw tightened, and for a moment he tried to summon the same arrogance that had carried him for years. He pounded his fist against the table, rattling glasses. All of you are nothing without me, he barked. My deals put food on your tables. My contracts keep your companies alive. You think you can stand against me? You would be nothing if not for my power. But the words, once sharp enough to cut, now landed with a hollow clang. They no longer inspired fear. They sounded desperate. Several guests shifted in their seats. One man pushed his chair back with deliberate slowness and rose, brushing imaginary dust from his suit. Without a word, he turned his back on Eduardo and walked toward the door. Another followed. Then another. Chairs scraped, murmurs swelled, and Eduardo's circle of allies crumbled before his eyes. Clara, who had always giggled at her father's cruelty, sat frozen. Her small fingers dug into the fabric of her dress, her wide eyes darting between her father and Mariana. For the first time she felt something she had never experienced before, fear. Mariana's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She had endured weeks of humiliation, and yet now she was watching the very foundations of Eduardo's pride shake. Don Ernesto remained standing tall, his presence like a pillar in the storm. You see, Eduardo, Ernesto said, his voice carrying over the chaos, power built on fear always collapses. It may take years, but eventually truth demands to be heard. Eduardo tried to laugh, but it came out strained, bitter. Truth? You think anyone will believe the lies you spill here? I own the law. I own the newspapers. I own the city. But even as he said it, his eyes darted to the envelope on the table. It sat there like a viper coiled to strike. Mariana's hands trembled at her sides, but she stepped forward. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmurs like a blade. You don't own respect, Eduardo. And that is what you've lost tonight. Eduardo's head snapped toward her, his glare filled with venom. You dare speak to me? He hissed. Yes, Mariana replied, her voice steady though her knees shook. Because your daughter is watching. Because she is not evil, Eduardo. She is a child, one who has been taught that cruelty is strength. But she doesn't have to grow into your shadow. The room fell still again. Clara's lips quivered. She looked at Mariana as if seeing her for the first time, not as a servant but as someone who spoke words her heart recognized. Eduardo sneered. You think you can save her? He leaned close, his breath hot with fury. You are nothing. Tomorrow you'll be gone and she will forget you. For a heartbeat Mariana almost broke. The weight of his contempt pressed on her chest, threatening to crush her. But then she felt a small tug at her sleeve. Clara's tiny hand clutched her arm, her eyes brimming with confusion. Is it true? Clara whispered so softly only Mariana heard. Is respect stronger than money? The question pierced Mariana's heart. She knelt down and held Clara's hand gently. Her voice shook, but her words were warm, filled with conviction. Yes, little one. Money can buy many things but it cannot buy love, it cannot buy kindness and it cannot buy peace. Respect builds those things. And you deserve to grow up knowing that. Clara blinked rapidly, her lower lip trembling. For the first time her arrogance faltered. Eduardo's fury exploded. Enough, he roared. You will not poison my daughter with your weakness. He seized Mariana's arm, his grip bruising. Gasps echoed from the remaining guests. For a moment, it seemed as though the millionaire might drag her out by force. But Ernesto's cane struck the floor sharply, drawing every eye. Let her go, Eduardo, he commanded. His voice was steel. Or I will see to it that every document in that envelope finds its way to the authorities tonight. Eduardo froze. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, and his grip tightened once more before he finally released her. Mariana staggered back, rubbing her wrist, her eyes locked on his with quiet defiance. The guests who had not yet left now stood, forming a line behind Ernesto. It was no longer Mariana alone against Eduardo, it was dignity itself against the weight of arrogance. Eduardo's laugh came out brittle, almost broken. All of you think you are heroes tonight. But tomorrow when the world sees me they will see a man untouchable. And you? He swept his gaze over them. You'll crawl back to me. But as he spoke, no one nodded. No one lowered their eyes. Instead, one by one they turned their backs on him. Clara's voice broke the silence. Small, wavering but clear. Papa, she hesitated, then whispered again, why are they leaving? The words seemed to slice through Eduardo more deeply than anything Mariana or Ernesto could have said. He faltered, staring at his daughter as if he had never truly seen her before. For a moment his lips parted, but no answer came. Mariana knelt again, brushing a tear from Clara's cheek. Because they have seen the truth, Clara, she said softly. And one day so will you. Eduardo's fury returned, but it was weaker now, like a flame flickering in the wind. He pointed at Mariana, his voice trembling. You're finished, fired, gone by tomorrow morning. And when you leave you will take nothing. Nothing. But the power in his words was gone. Everyone in the room felt it. Don Ernesto moved to Mariana's side, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. You will not leave like a dismissed servant, he said. You will leave with your head high. Tonight the truth has spoken louder than pride. And dignity has won. Eduardo's face twisted as though he might scream, but no sound came. He was trapped, cornered not by force but by the crumbling of his own empire. His authority, once unshakable, was now only an echo. Mariana stood tall, Clara's small hand still clinging to hers. The battle was not over, but for the first time, the weight of humiliation had lifted. She felt strength where before she had felt only pain. And in Eduardo's silence, the mansion itself seemed to exhale, as though even its walls had longed for this moment. The guests filed out of the dining hall one by one, their footsteps echoing against the marble floors like a verdict. Eduardo stood frozen, fists clenched, watching his empire of fear dissolve before his eyes. His smirk was gone, replaced by a hollow stare that betrayed the truth, he had lost control. Only Mariana, Clara, and Don Ernesto remained. The silence was heavy, as though the house itself waited to see what would happen next. Clara's hand still clung to Mariana's, her small fingers trembling. She looked at her father with wide, tearful eyes, no longer the spoiled child who mocked and insulted, but a frightened little girl. Papa, she whispered, are they right? Eduardo's lips parted, but no answer came. For the first time he looked like a man stripped bare, no wealth, no power, only pride crumbling. His silence was an answer Clara understood better than words. Mariana knelt in front of the girl, brushing a lock of hair from her face. It's not your fault, Clara, she said softly. You didn't choose what you were taught. But you can choose what kind of person you want to be. You don't have to repeat the same mistakes. The child's tears spilled over. She wrapped her arms around Mariana's neck, holding her tightly as though clinging to the first warmth she had ever known. Don Ernesto stepped closer, his voice steady. "Mariana, you have given more courage tonight than anyone else dared in years. You reminded us that dignity is not something wealth can buy." He turned his sharp gaze to Eduardo. "And you, Eduardo, must live with the knowledge that you raised your daughter to fear you, not respect you. That will be your true punishment." Eduardo staggered back a step, unable to respond. His shoulders slumped under the weight of his own pride. The next morning, news spread quickly. Ernesto's documents reached the authorities, and investigations began into Eduardo's fraudulent contracts. Business partners who once bowed to him cut their ties. His reputation, built on intimidation, collapsed like a house of cards. But for Mariana, the ending was different. She left the mansion with her head high, not as a dismissed servant but as a woman who had faced humiliation and answered it with strength. Offers for work arrived from families who had heard her story, yet the greatest reward came from Clara herself. Days later, the little girl appeared at her modest doorstep, guided by Ernesto's driver. Clara's eyes brimmed with tears as she whispered, "I'm sorry." She clung to Mariana once more, this time not in arrogance but in genuine need for love. Mariana embraced her, knowing that breaking the chain of cruelty was the true victory. Eduardo's empire crumbled, but the lesson remained clear. Money and power may command silence, but they cannot demand respect. True wealth is not in what you own but in how you treat others. And so Mariana walked forward, her dignity intact, leaving behind a mansion filled with pride, and carrying with her the seed of change that might one day grow in Clara's heart.